Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dion. I am the nutrition consultant for Choices Markets Abbotsford, and welcome to Taste the Wild, Foraging and Cooking with BC Spring Wild Greens. So if you signed up and are attending this live, you are eligible to get one of these, which is a nutrition buck that is $10 off if you spend $50 or more in our store. So stay tuned. After the event, you'll be sent an email with a link. It's a quick survey, and we'll ask you for your mailing address. And then we'll send you one of those by mail. So I am very excited. We have two speakers tonight. We have Carla Budd, who is a registered holistic nutritionist. Carla holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Dance Kinesiology from the University of Calgary, is a registered holistic nutritionist, and is currently completing a Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology from Yorkville University. She uses biopsychosocial approach to treat the whole person versus separate parts, both clinically and therapeutically. Her interest is in nutrition, or her interest in nutrition, led to private consulting and working in elementary schools with the program Earth Bites. This is teaching children about seasonal gardening, health benefits, and preparing food. She loves using the produce from West Coast wild foods to create delicious seasonal recipes packed with nutrition, the absolute best way to eat locally. And our first speaker is Niall Sherwin. He has been working with West Coast Wild Foods since 2014. Beginning as a warehouse associate, Niall spent 4 years representing the company, excuse me, as a forager and purchasing agent traveling around BC, the Yukon and Northwest Territories during the spring and summer seasons, and managing the warehouse team during the fall and winter. Niall was directly involved in BC maple syrup production each winter, fiddlehead and wild greens harvesting each spring, morel mushroom and huckleberry harvesting each summer. During this time, Niall's passion for foraging and wild foods grew along with his knowledge of the craft. In 2018, Niall moved back to Vancouver full-time to develop and lead the sales and marketing team at West Coast, making the connection with Choices as a supplier and partner in spring 2018. So this is really exciting. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Dion, and hi guys. My name's Niall, and as Dion mentioned, I've been working with West Coast Wild Foods for about 7 years. I've been incredibly fortunate to be able to explore the province each year, learning about and foraging for various wild foods, and sharing this experience with some amazing people. The lifestyle and the adventure of foraging, like from season to season, is something that I had no idea about before I joined the team here. There's so much to learn about the forests and about the wilderness in BC. I'm still learning after 7 years, and I'll still be learning for years to come. I'm really excited to share some of the tips and some of the information that I've learned so far about foraging for wild greens, particularly some of the greens that we harvest and supply to Choices Markets, who have been an amazing local partner for us for about 3 years now. I'm also joined by Carla Budd, who, as Dion mentioned, is a registered holistic nutritionist. She'll be sharing some awesome information about the nutritional aspects and benefits of these wild foods, along with some storage and preparation tips, as well as some cooking tips and recipe ideas, which I'm super excited for. So tonight we'll be talking about 4 wild foods that we're harvesting right now. They're in season locally. So these are fiddleheads, stinging nettle, big leaf maple blossoms, and spruce tips. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. I'd love to start with my favorite of all the wild spring greens that we harvest, and that's BC fiddleheads. They're so much fun to look for, so much fun to pick, and they're incredible to cook with. So I'm pretty excited. I actually have a little bit of video to go along with this, which is exciting. We shot some footage recently on a fiddlehead foraging expedition that we went on recently, and I think it'll be a fun way to show you guys the experience of foraging, as well as the identification and the sustainable harvesting techniques that we use. So I'll go ahead and pull this up. Okay, so If you ever walk through the forest or any wetland areas in BC, you'll see tons of ferns everywhere. Year round, they're in the forest. They're super common. There are, however, a lot of different types of ferns. There's the sword fern, bracken fern, cinnamon fern, lady fern, licorice fern, and ostrich fern, among others. There's a bunch. It's really important if you're going foraging for fiddleheads that you're able to correctly identify the ostrich fern. This is the one that we picked fiddleheads from to eat. Most of the other ferns, not all, but most of them are actually not edible. So they will give you severe like indigestion if you try to eat them. It's kind of funny when we talk to people about fiddleheads, a lot of the time someone will be like, oh my gosh, they're in my garden, I'm gonna go pick them. That's great, maybe they are, but it is really important to know the ostrich fern and to know that you're picking the right one. Um, so like I said, they do grow up in wetland areas. So in almost every area that has a body of water or an area that floods seasonally, um, they're they're very prominent in those areas. Anywhere where there's a lot of moisture in the ground basically is where you would most likely find fiddleheads. And the common feature of any fiddlehead patch is its proximity to a body of water or to a wetland area. So my first tip would be if you are going foraging for fiddleheads and you're walking up the mountain, then you should probably turn around because you're very unlikely to find them up there. If you walk down, however, and you find a flat and you can see a river or you can see that there's a lot of moisture in the ground, then you're a lot more likely to find them in that area. So I just paused the video here to show you guys something. There are two key features to look out for when you're trying to identify ostrich ferns. And when you walk into an area and you're not sure if there's ostrich ferns around, this is the first thing that will kind of show you that there are ferns in the ground, although you might not be able to see them. So this is what we call it a feather. It's actually a fertile frond. So it grows from the crown of the ostrich fern plant each year, and it stands usually for 1 year before falling away. Now, not all plants will have this frond. They do last for a year, but generally between winter storms and wildlife and heavy snow, sometimes these plants won't have the frond, but there are generally going to be a few of them in the patch when you're picking. Like I said, we call it a feather, and it actually the ostrich fern is actually named because this frond resembles the tail feathers of the ostrich. Although growing up in Ireland, my ostrich knowledge is kind of limited, so I can't really speak to the accuracy of the name, but it does definitely look like a feather, so that's for sure. You'll see when I'm pointing at this feather, there's actually quite a lot of pollen on it, which I'll touch on in a minute. This is one of the ways that the ostrich fern reproduces each year. But once you've found the correct feather, you can see that at the base, if it's the right time of year, if it's warm enough, then there will be some fiddleheads starting to emerge from the crown. These crowns are often under the leaves. They're very hard to spot, especially in early spring, before the fiddleheads have started to stand up properly. So the second way to basically be positive that you're picking the correct fern is the fiddleheads will have a V-shaped groove on the back of the stem. So I'll just pause it right here. So that groove is unique to the ostrich fern. It's the second way to tell for sure that you're picking the correct fiddleheads. If you are a little more experienced with picking fiddleheads, you can generally tell with the shade of green that the fiddleheads have. It's pretty unique to the ostrich fern too. The dark, beautiful shade of green is unique to the ostrich fern. Most of the other ferns have like a lighter stem, or some of them are covered with like a whitish kind of material. So once you've found the feather and you've found your first fiddleheads, then you can check the back of the stem. If the stem has that V-shaped groove, which basically goes all the way from the very base, all the way up the stem and like into the top of the fiddlehead, then you are good to go. You know, you're picking the correct fiddleheads and the fun can begin. So you'll see when we're walking around and we're picking, a lot of the fiddleheads are under the leaves, so they're very hard to spot. And what I like to do when I'm picking, when I found my first plant, I'll pick a couple of the fiddleheads, and while I'm picking, I'll be constantly scanning along the floor of the forest for either the next feather or the next pod of fiddleheads that I can see. Like I said, there won't be a feather on every plant. It's not that easy, but you will see one in the distance or hopefully one in proximity when you're picking. And this is kind of how we travel through the patch. We find the first one, which is kind of like a flag to say like, hello, there's fiddleheads here. And then after that, we're scanning the ground and we're looking for the next sign, be it a feather or an actual pot of fiddleheads. And depending on the timing of the season, some of the fiddleheads will be really easy to spot. They'll be, 6 or 8 inches above the ground and a vibrant green, so they'll be easy to spot. But the other ones mainly will be like hiding under leaves and branches that are lining the forest floor. So it really is kind of a hunt. It's a treasure hunt and it's an adventure, even if you know like a lot of the areas that we pick fiddleheads because they grow so predominantly in these areas, and they do like the patches multiply year by year. So we go to the same areas every year, which is cool. So we kind of know a specific area should have some fiddleheads in it, but nonetheless, even if you know they're there, they can be quite hard to spot. So it is always a bit of an adventure when you're doing it. I was taught when I was starting that if you are walking, and you can be walking for a couple of hours if you're not sure if the fiddleheads are in the area, once you find your first one, almost guaranteed that it has friends. And the reason for that is because of the way that they reproduce. I'm just going to skip back here. The way that the plants reproduce, they have the pollen-bearing frond, which I mentioned, and they also reproduce via creeping rhizomes, which are like underground roots that spread from 3 to 6 feet around the plants. So year after year, if the pollination is successful, then the plants will take root in different areas of the forest. And if not, then the creeping rhizomes will actually allow the ostrich fern to multiply year over year, which is pretty cool. The life cycle of like the patch of fiddleheads itself is mainly tied to the life cycle of the forest. So you'll notice that if you are in the forest when you're picking fiddleheads and you're not in an open area, it's usually quite a young forest of second growth trees. They will grow in the old growth in certain areas that do flood each year, but as the forest gets older and starts to crowd out the sunlight, the fiddleheads are competing for sunlight, and generally over a very long span of time, they'll either decline or they'll move out into the sunshine, which is pretty cool. So the patches do kind of migrate over time, which is neat. So when you're doing it year after year, I've gone to the same areas, give or take, for about 7 years, and you can notice not only the patches increasing in size, but based on the sunlight, or say, for example, during a winter storm, a certain tree came down, you can notice that the spots in the forest that hold more warmth and are sheltered from the frost in like early spring, those spots will have a lot more fiddleheads than they did the year before, which is really exciting. It is really such an adventure. The second thing that I'd like to briefly touch on is the identification is obviously very important because you have to know what you're picking and that it's going to be good to eat. The second thing is the sustainable harvesting techniques that we use when we're picking fiddleheads. So, like I mentioned, the patches do multiply and they are quite prolific in terms of growth. Nevertheless, it's always important, no matter what food you're harvesting, that you only take enough so that you won't impact the plants or the health of the surrounding ecosystem in any way. And the way that we do this is with fiddleheads. I'll be able to show you an example here shortly. Generally, the pods that hold the fiddleheads will have 6 to 12 fiddleheads in them, depending on the size of the plant. We only harvest half or 3 of the fiddleheads. So if the pod has 6 fiddleheads, we'll take 3 and we'll leave 3, which allows them to unfurl in late spring and continues the natural growth of the plant from year to year. If, for example, there is 12 fiddleheads, then you're able to harvest up to 6, leaving half in the pot, so the rule is half or 3, depending on the situation. I'll show you an example of a different type of area that has fiddleheads. So this area that we're walking through right now, a lot of the plants are quite small, so you can tell that in general, this area is quite a young patch compared to what you can see now, which is like the fiddleheads are much bigger, they're standing a foot above the ground, they look beautiful, and they're much easier to spot. This area, I couldn't even hazard a guess, but the fiddleheads have been there a long, long time, decades and decades, and these plants, you can tell the size and shape of the pod and the number of fiddleheads in them, you can tell how mature the patch is in many ways. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to hand over to Carla for some info on the wonderful nutritional aspects of fiddleheads, along with some cooking instructions.
Awesome. Thank you, Niall. I love learning. That was really, really interesting to know, especially about plant reproduction and, also only taking the certain amount away to leave what needs to be there. I'm happy to hear that. So some of the nutritional benefits of fiddleheads are, let me just see here one sec. Okay. Is that they are really high in fiber and low calorie. So normally if you grew up kind of in the 80s and 90s like me, fiber you equate with bread. So we like to get fiber from bread, but what bread lacks is a lot of the nutritional benefits of vitamins and minerals that we get from vegetables. They're also really low calorie, and while bread can be low calorie on its own, sometimes we put things on them like mayonnaise and cheese and things that might not be particularly low cal. Fiddleheads are really great because they do have a lot of vitamins and minerals, and vitamin C is one of those, which is known for helping with your immune system and fighting off colds. Immune function is really, really important at the times that we're in right now. Vitamin C is also becoming more well known as collagen formation has been kind of come into the spotlight more. So collagen got really popular during the bulletproof diet, and now it's known to kind of plump up our facial features, but you need vitamin C to do that. So fiddleheads can help with that. It also has beta carotene for helping with vision and your organ function. And once you put some nice butter on those fiddleheads, then the beta carotene can convert into vitamin A. So vitamin A is a fat soluble vitamin, which means you need fat to convert beta carotene to vitamin A. And I'm going to reference this a couple times. I love food and the way that nature presents it to us, because oftentimes the food looks like the body parts that it's good for. So for instance, the way that it's standing very tall and curling, kind of where the eyes are significant to the fact that it has those vitamins that are good for your vision, but it also has manganese in it, which is good for healthy bone formation. It also has niacin, which is vitamin B3, and our B vitamins are really important for keeping our nervous system regulated, converting food to energy, but also for healthy skin. So if you're noticing that you're kind of lethargic and tired a lot, and your nervous system's just going from one end of the spectrum to the other, and your skin's looking a little dull, you might need some B vitamins. So fiddleheads are a really good source of that. And I didn't know this, but the ostrich fiddleheads that Niall was speaking about have omega-3s and twice the antioxidants of blueberries. And blueberries, again, are known for eyesight because of how they can resemble eyes. And this is also why I really love wild foods, because you're not just picking and eating the food itself, you're getting all of the biodiversity from the forest floor within the plant. And it's probably why green plants can have omega-3s and tons of antioxidants, because it's taking it from such a rich array of diversity from the forest floor versus large scale farming that might only use a couple certain types of fertilizers and then also put pesticides and herbicides together, which might kind of present it as a similar looking vegetable, but just not have the same nutrient content as well. So for handling fiddleheads, it's really important that you wash them very well. They can contain little bits of dirt or whatever might have been picked up from the forest floor. Once you purchase them, you're going to want to keep them in your fridge for about 5 to 7 days. And you're going to find a lot of different cooking recommendations online. Some people will say you can eat them raw. Some people will say just saute them up really quickly. But we stand by the Health Canada guidelines for boiling for 15 minutes or steaming for 10 to 12, just to prevent any foodborne illnesses that could come with them. And to preserve them, you can freeze them or even pickle them. And I don't know if any of you drink Caesars with green beans, but Caesars with pickled fiddleheads are a really cool idea. Some meal ideas. So fiddleheads are kind of like a nuttier, woodsier, let's say green bean or asparagus. So you can, once you've boiled them or steamed them, just use them exactly like you would asparagus or green beans. Just butter, phenomenal, a little bit of lemon and garlic, balsamic vinegar reduction, or if you're kind of going for more Asian fusion, you can do ginger and sesame oil together, and they go well with Italian themed like risottos and pastas. You can make a salad if you cool them down. One website just said they're the best with potatoes and eggs. And so you can pair them with a really nice breakfast or brunch, or even make quiche. And fiddleheads are pretty notorious all around the world. So areas like Japan make fiddlehead tempura. There's also different types of stews and curries with coconut milk and turmeric, and even sauteed with different types of cheese, which I thought was really yummy. And like all of these foods we're going to be talking about today, there seems to be ways to make alcohol with them. So Norway and Siberia use fiddleheads for beer making, and Europe also uses it as a wine preservative. The other theme with these foods is that they are very, very medicinal. So nature has kind of gifted us with foods that can satisfy our culinary appetite, but they're also very good for our health. So when you see those fiddleheads, how they curl up and they almost look like snails or worms, and they're actually used medicinally for intestinal parasites as a detoxifier as well. This is a recipe that I got from, I believe, Land of Nom, and I gave it a little bit of a twist. So the one thing that I did differently here was I added some diced spring green onions, because we do have some wild spring green onions in stock. I also just said a flatbread of choice versus putting the whole dough recipe, because you can make the toppings like this for any types of bread. And you can write down the recipe or the link down there at the bottom. The only other thing that I changed in this recipe was the cooking instructions, again, for the Health Canada recommendations versus just sauteing it with 2 tablespoons of butter like the recipe said. But this is a really great way that you can use fiddleheads differently than just a side dish, and you can kind of jazz them up. And now I'm going to pass it back, Niall, if you want to start with our next wonderful veggie.
All right. Thank you so much, Carla. That was great. I'm starving now. Fiddleheads for dinner. Definitely fiddleheads for dinner tonight. So second on the agenda here is stinging nettle. It's probably my second favorite thing to forage for after fiddleheads. Kind of a contested topic in terms of favorite to forage for. Some people really enjoy foraging for it, and other people just don't. It's kind of a personal preference. I think it all comes down to the stinging aspect of it. Some people are okay with the occasional nettle sting. Other people, really don't enjoy it. It does depend from person to person how, the stinging nettle does have these little needles. They're called trichomes. They're underneath the leaf and they're on the stem. And they will give you a little bit of a sting if you brush up against them accidentally. It'll cause a little bit of itching and irritation for, depending on the person, half an hour to a couple hours. I know from my childhood growing up, we had nettle everywhere. We grew up in nettle. When we were playing, we were climbing trees and inevitably falling out of said trees into nettle. And there was always a ton of like home remedies for neutralizing the nettle sting. I don't know how many of them are accurate or how many of them aren't. I know for me, I was always told, there's a certain plant that grows close by the nettle always. Rub it on your arm if you got stung on your arm, and it'll neutralize it. Like I said, not sure about the accuracy of those. I do have one tip that I was taught a few years ago, which definitely does work for me at least. And when I tell people this, people think that I'm joking or trying to pull some cruel prank, but actually it does work and it's not a prank, I promise. So if you do get stung by a nettle and it's bothering you, you can actually, if you do it in the correct way, the needles on the nettle are all pointing in a certain direction. If you grab the leaf from the other direction, you can actually pick it without getting stung. So you pick a leaf and you fold it over very carefully twice on itself and kind of crush it between your forefinger and your thumb. And this is the part that people think I'm pulling a prank on. You pop it in your mouth and chew on it for about 10 seconds. And then you would just take it back out and rub it on whatever part of your arm or your leg got stung. I'm not sure entirely about the chemistry behind it, but your saliva in combination with the nettle actually works to neutralize the sting on your arm or your leg. And you guys are just gonna have to trust me. Try it if you ever do get stung, and I promise it really works, and it helps a lot, especially if you're, if you're out foraging for the day and you're walking through an area that has nettles, and if you happen to be wearing shorts, or if you get, if you bend down to pick something up and you get stung, and if it happens enough times, it will bother you. If you've done it for a long time and you're out there every day, it does get less bothersome. Like your body will get used to it. It'll be less of a shock for your body than if it was just once, like the first time of the year when you got stung. There's a few things that you can take, like precaution-wise, to avoid that. Obviously, long pants is a good idea, even if it's a warm day. Always a good idea to wear long pants when you're foraging for nettle. Rubber gloves and then a scissors to do your harvesting with is fine. Some people like to use like a pruning shears. Either or is fine. Sometimes you'll find, depending on the weather, the scissors might get a little bit gummy after a while if you're after a few different plants. So a shears that has like a spring-loaded shears is probably best. So yeah, stinging nettle, a lot of people are aware of it. Some people aren't. The greatest thing about it is cooking it, which I'll allow Carla to speak about in a moment. But so they were originally native to Europe. Stinging nettle has pretty much naturalized all over North America now. They're pretty predominant in every part of the continent, and they thrive in damp ground, which is actually quite nice because when you're picking fiddleheads, all of the time stinging nettle will be growing in the same areas. They like wetlands and flat ground that is prone to seasonal flooding. And when they do grow, they tend to grow quite dense, so you'll never really see one stinging nettle plant on its own. It's usually quite a large group of them. They do grow very prolifically in the areas where they've settled. You'll see on the picture here that they have opposite leaves, and I think it's actually quite beautiful, like the symmetry and the natural geometry. It's a beautiful plant. Some people love it, some people don't love it, but I think it's really neat. The opposite leaves and the pointed tip are two ways to basically identify that it is in fact stinging nettle. So the best time to harvest would be in early spring. You're going to want to harvest the nettle when it's probably no more than a foot tall. And the reason for this is once it gets to a certain size and it starts to flower, the stems and the leaves actually become a little bit different in flavor. The stems become a bit less tender, almost fibery. And then when it does start to flower in the summer, the flavor and the nutritional content actually does change quite a bit. So it's really an early spring harvest. The first thing to appear in spring is the stinging nettle, and that's what we kind of, it's like it heralds the beginning of the spring season, and it brings on all the good stuff that comes with it, which is pretty cool. So when you are picking it, we do recommend to harvest at the very most 6 inches, depending on the size of the plant, either 6 inches or down to the second set of leaves, which is basically when it stops being as tender. I'll show you guys an example of how it would look in the summer when it begins to flower. So when it flowers, you'll see at the very top of the plant and along the stem, the white buds start to flower. This is pretty much an indication that the nettle in that area is no longer good to harvest. And if you do see that, it's always best to walk past it and try and find an area that maybe has been a bit cooler recently, or although they do grow on flat grounds, they also grow on slopes too. So it's a good idea to get on the other side. If you're on a south slope, head on over to the north slope, and it'll generally be a bit cooler. The nettle might be a little less flowered at that area. Yeah, so that's pretty much it in terms of foraging. Like I said, the really good stuff is the cooking and the nutritional benefits, because it is a wonderful plant. So I'll hand it back over to Carla for some of the good stuff.
Probably can't hear me now. You can. All right. Good. So yes, it's not something that I've necessarily foraged for, but I've cooked a lot, and probably just because it is so versatile. Again, it's got tons of fiber. We're going to get into how much fiber it actually does have. It also has some protein in it, which is wonderful because we can get protein from plants, so that helps with our muscle building. It's got that vitamin A that we were talking about in the fiddleheads. It also has vitamin K and calcium, which is really cool because we know a lot about calcium from, again, referencing my age here, growing up in the 80s and 90s when we were told milk was the only source of calcium. And now we're learning that there's other foods that indeed have calcium, and plants are one of them. You do need vitamin K. They kind of hold each other's hand for absorption. So if you're taking a lot of calcium supplements and you're not getting enough vitamin K with them, you can get calcium deposits in areas of your body that you don't necessarily want them, in different sort of fatty tissues and things like that. So it's really good to get your vitamins and minerals from whole food sources as much as you can, just how nature intended, and just make sure whenever you're getting your supplement advice from a nutritionist or a naturopath that they're aware of what needs what for absorption. Nettles are an incredible source of iron, which is very important for our red blood cell production, which helps to give us energy and speed up the healing process. So if we bruise easily, we might have a little bit of an iron deficiency. Really common with women to be iron deficient. And if you ever see kids like chewing metal or eating pencils or something, that's their intuitive way of saying, I'm low in iron. To the point of it being called pica, a condition where kids are iron deficient. So nettles are really, really great for that. They also contain some potassium and magnesium, which are known for electrolytes and for getting your heart pumping healthy. And just to top it off, to help them be so medicinal, is they have a lot of chlorophyll, which is what gives it that green pigment. It's also an antioxidant, helps build up the blood, and also is really detoxifying and can chelate heavy metals from the body. It has been quoted as being the poster child for food as medicine. It has been referenced about 4 times in the Bible, as well as some other areas in the world, and it's been used for millennia as a plant medicine. It, again, has those detoxifying properties and has been used to treat joint pain and gout. It's also been used as a Native American remedy for assisting with pain during childbirth and also for reducing fever. And modern medicine is investigating its benefits for things like blood sugar regulation and diabetes, allergies, arthritis, and even urinary tract problems. Now, I was talking about fiber, and I'm not going to, obviously it's a half-an-hour video, but I just wanted to show you about some of the resources that there is around
interesting prehistoric text
around how the fiber in these vegetables is actually used for fabric. So flaxseed's another one that gets a lot of good attention for this, but this woman's amazing because she's like picking it without gloves. I don't know how she's doing it. So maybe she knows the Niall technique, but she's just going for it. I don't know how. So yeah, there's really cool whole uses for foods that way. And for handling stinging nettles, consume them after 3 or 4 days of purchase, and you only need to boil them for a couple minutes to get rid of the sting. I like to, when I get it brought home in huge bulk quantities, I'll blanch it all there on the spot, and then I'll put it in freezer bags because we use it a lot for smoothies. Or I'll keep some in the fridge to put in the different soups and sauces and stuff like that. And we also really like to dehydrate it to make nettle tea. When we've got an abundance, that's the great things with wild foods is you get a lot in a short amount of time. So you have to find really effective, efficient ways to preserve it. So we have Italian seasonings where we've got nettle flakes in it, and keep the blanched or boiled water because there's a chock full of that iron and other nutrients in it. And you can make nettle lemonade or iced tea, and the vitamin C from the lemon will help absorb the iron. For an awesome treat. And West Coast Wild Foods maple syrup, when that's in there, what a delicious iced tea you have. And there's some meal ideas. So nettle is the new kale. I just want to announce it. Of course, not raw, has to be cooked. But wherever you would normally use cooked kale, spinach, and chard, you can use nettle. Again, it can be frozen, so putting that in green smoothies. It's really well known for different pesto sauces and salad dressings. You can get really fancy and maybe fold it up with some ravioli and beautiful cheese. You can make quiche out of it. I made a nettle, Asiago, and artichoke dip once, and that was really, really delicious. If you're vegan, you can make kind of cream of nettle soups where instead of using dairy, you can blend up some cashews with the nettle and your favorite vegetable seasoning, and it's really, really yummy. And again, there's stories of nettle beer and lots of different nettle teas as well. I called this nettle presto because I don't necessarily like measuring everything. So you think of throwing things in the blender and saying presto and blend it and you have beautiful pesto. So just put in about a half cup of cooked or cooled nettle. Make sure you've got enough oil to cover everything that you've put into the blender, just to cover. And then you get to choose. Do you want there to be walnuts, pumpkin seeds? Basil is always the herb that you want to get the pesto flavor, and then your choice. No garlic, tons of garlic. If you want some cheese in there, you can go for it. You don't have to. If you're not using cheese, make sure to give it some salt for some seasoning. And some people do like their pesto with a little bit of a lemon flavor, so you can squeeze some lemon in there. And then this is my family's favorite way to consume these is with the tropical nettle smoothies. And I've experimented with nettles and berries, and it's a little too almost kind of competing for a sour, bitter without too much sweet flavor. So nettles complement tropical fruit really, really well. And again, you're getting the vitamin C from the tropical fruit to take the iron from the nettle in. And you get kind of a free choice of what types of seeds you want to add in there, if you want protein powder or not, and whatever milk of choice that you'd like. And I think that's it. That's it for that.
All right. Thank you so much, Carla. That was awesome. I'm just going to share my screen. That was great. Oh, I had no idea the combination of tropical fruits and nettle would be so cool. I have to try that sometime. It sounds really good.
Really, really good.
Yeah. And nettle is the new kale. I'm stealing that, by the way. Nettle chips, anyone? You heard it first.
Yeah.
Okay, so next on the agenda here is big leaf maple blossoms, which are super fun. Big leaf maple is obviously, really well known around BC. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the trees themselves, although on a personal opinion note, it does just happen to make the best maple syrup in the world, which is, again, my opinion. That would obviously be hotly debated by a lot of people, I'm sure, especially on the East Coast. But I've tried quite a few different types, and the big leaf maple is awesome. Other than the maple syrup, one of the lesser known parts of the maple tree that you can actually harvest and use for cooking and nutritional benefits are the blossoms. They're really neat. They are essentially the young flowers that appear on the maple trees as the buds form in like late spring. So in terms of timing, they are a little bit later than the nettle and the fiddleheads, generally depending on the area and the weather at the time, between 7 and 10 days after you see fiddleheads in an area. If there are any big leaf maple in that area, about 7 to 10 days after, you'll see the maple blossoms start to come out, which is neat. I like to use it as a kind of a frame of reference when I'm picking fiddleheads. If I find a patch of fiddleheads and I'm picking them, I can kind of think, oh yeah, so the maple blossoms should be here next week. That's fun. Like, that's something to look forward to. So when you are harvesting the maple blossoms, as with all other wild foods, you should only harvest a small percentage of what's available. Luckily, with the maple blossoms in particular, maple trees in general are quite tall, that they'll grow to up to 100 feet. Some of them will be over 100 feet. So unless you have, a jetpack or something, you're only ever going to be able to reach the one or two of lowest lying limbs. So in general, you can pick maybe, if you're lucky, 6 to a dozen of the buds off the tree before moving on and trying to find another tree with like a low hanging branch. Yeah, they're such a fun thing to pick. You can eat them right off the tree. They have an amazing floral flavor, and I think they're quite beautiful. We like to share them as much as possible. They do grow in quite a short window of time. The flowers do develop quite quickly once the buds have started to flower. So in general, about give or take about 2 weeks is the window each year when you can harvest maple blossoms in a certain area. So they really are a seasonal delicacy, and as well as being really beautiful, they are incredibly tasty. So I am going to give it back to Carla, because again, the nutritional info is the good part. The foraging of the blossoms themselves. If you are lucky enough to have a maple tree on your property, or if you know an area in the backcountry where there are some big leaf maple, mid to late spring is when you're going to want to start looking for them, and you'll see the buds, like the lower buds on the tree, as they start to blossom. They've got a beautiful, vibrant green color, and as soon as you see them, you can pick one, and I would advise just trying one straight off the tree, and you'll love it. So, yeah, I'll hand back over to Carla.
Okay, great. So these are a pretty interesting plant, and when I was learning about them, going back to the kind of foods are good for the body parts they look like, because I was researching how they are full of potassium and zinc is known to be a really important mineral in men's health, producing testosterone and those types of things. Potassium, again, really good for electrolytes, and both together are good for your immune system. And then malic acid they have as well, which I've always known as malic acid to help soften things like calcium deposits, like when my dad was having kidney stones attacks, it would be like, drink apple juice, malic acid, malic acid. So what I didn't know is they help absorb creatine as well for energy and preventing muscle fatigue. So there is a type of, let's say, phallic nature to these plants, and the nutrients that they contain back that up as well. They also are abundant with bioactive polyphenols and amino acids, and those are all the kind of key components to live fresh foods. Those are all the things that you can get from live fresh foods that you can't really get from packaged processed foods, and always great for supporting your cardiovascular health, your immune system, and regulating blood sugar as well. So for handling them, it's good to keep them in your fridge for about 3 to 4 days after you purchase them. These are a wild food, like Niall said. You can eat them raw, straight off the tree. They do have that floral flavor, and you can also fry them. That's kind of one of the most popular uses for them, is actually to mix them with certain batters and experiment with frying them up. They can be steamed as well. And if you found that you've kind of got more than you're using, then it's a good idea to quickly blanch them and freeze them, or else you can pickle them as well, which would be really interesting. So they are sweet and savory. So they have that floral flavor. They're also described as being neutral and a little vegetal. So think of when you're frying up some sort of squashes, how they can be really either sweet or savory and used with those types of flavors, but they have a very crisp texture. So that's kind of why they maintain their structure when you're doing things like frying them. Again, pickles. They pair with a lot of really neat flavors too. So when we think of mint and basil and parsley, what comes to mind for me is a lot of the Mediterranean or Middle Eastern cooking that combines mint and basil and parsley and lemon together in certain tabbouleh and dishes like that. Also pairs really well with eggs, pumpkin seeds, vanilla, and different spring veggies. So with the eggs and vanilla aspect, we're going to talk about a recipe. Some other meal ideas are just making a really fresh salad with some basil dressing. And this basil dressing, I often like to put in some dried nettle flakes as well. So I put in a little wild bang for the buck by putting some nettle flakes into my salad dressings. You can saute them in stir fries, and there's a recipe online that uses them in spring rolls, or making spring or salad rolls for a neat ingredient there. Lots of ways you can make cordials and syrups with them. And there was not one recipe online for maple blossom tabbouleh, but I really want to make some. So I'm waiting for some maple blossoms to come home, and then I'm going to try this recipe out. So again, the creative kitchen is yours. You get to experiment when you're making. It's the beautiful thing about cooking and experimenting with foods, is you're going to come across some trial and errors, but when there is the hit, it's the hit. So when I found out that this plant goes really well with mint and lemon and basil and parsley, I was like, oof, this would be so good with a type of tabbouleh. I also like making mine with pumpkin seeds too, so that fits in there nice. And just really simple: olive oil, lemon juice, salt, pepper, and then whatever else you want. Some people like feta cheese, some people like olives. You can chop up any other veggies you like. For some spring veggies that are available too, those wild spring onions, watercress, miner's lettuce, I believe too. Could be some other wild leaves you put in there. And then this is a really popular recipe for maple blossoms, is making fritters. So if you want, you can use just the left ingredients, which is mostly just the powdered ingredients: flour, cornstarch, water. If you want to add eggs and make it a little bit more fluffier, that way you can, but you don't need to. So they are suitable for vegetarians, vegans, anything like that. And then there's some way to prepare them on the side. Just get the dry ingredients, add the vanilla and water. Make sure your vegetable oil is nice and heated. You can use coconut oil, safflower oil. Just try to buy a non-GMO oil if you're going to go with safflower or canola. Coat the blossoms, let it all drip off. Chuck it in the pan, let it fry until brown, and then of course drizzle on top with some of that beautiful maple syrup again, or powdered sugar. I think that's that for that one.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carla. That was great. I really want to try the tabbouleh as soon as it's ready, please.
I know, right?
Amazing. So the last of our wild foods that we're going to feature tonight are spruce tips, which are super exciting. In terms of timing, they are a late spring harvest. So similar to the maple blossoms, if you're seeing nettle and fiddleheads, you'll be waiting about a week to 10 days for the spruce tips, depending on the area. They are essentially the young growth on the branches of spruce trees, and they really do look quite neat. They have a vibrant green color in contrast to the previous year's growth. So when they're starting to emerge, you'll notice them almost right away. It's a really beautiful sight when you do see them. In terms of the type of spruce tree, so the good news is each type of spruce, the tips are edible, and they actually have a quite a different flavor from species to species. Some people prefer one type over the other, but my advice would be, once you're confident that it is actually a spruce tree, I would try a few different types if you like. Some of them have a little bit of more bitterness than others. The type that we harvest is the Engelmann spruce. It's also known as white spruce in some areas, and that's down to a personal taste. Really, we find that the flavor from the Engelmann spruce tips is not only the strongest, but it's kind of like the most well-rounded. So you can use it in a variety of different ways. So you'll know essentially when they're ready as soon as you can see them. You can pick them anywhere from half an inch up to an inch and a half. Once they get a little bit larger, they do lose their flavor quite a bit, and they can be a little bit harder to digest. So, the young spruce tips, as soon as they emerge, would be kind of what you're looking for in terms of harvesting. Again, it is very important to remember when you're harvesting from the tree, this is the young growth of the tree. You only need to take a couple from each tree. They are a little bit more easy to access compared to the big leaf maple. A lot of the limbs grow a lot lower to the ground. So you would be able to reach quite a few of them from standing, but we always recommend a couple from each tree is fine, because in general, if you are in a stand of spruce, there are 1,000 trees out there. Especially if it's a small spruce, you don't want to pick any of the tips that are on the crown of the tree. You always want to go for the lower limbs, and a couple from each. And yeah, I mean, other than that, the important thing really is just to have fun, enjoy yourself, get out into the wonderful nature that we're surrounded by, and just explore and learn and be curious about what grows around you. From my perspective, this is just a personal opinion, but we live in one of the most beautiful and abundant areas in the whole world. But life happens, everybody's busy. Whether you're living in an urban area or not, it can be sometimes easy to forget the bigger picture and the wonderful surroundings that we're lucky to have. So, it's nice every now and then to just take pause and take the time to go outside, go and explore, and enjoy your time in nature and appreciate what it provides for us. So that's that from me. I will hand over to Carla again for some nutritional info.
I love that. So true. So true. And I like that when you can bring that perspective from taking the time and just remarking at what's outside and what's available. When you bring that kind of spirit and vibe into the kitchen, it can be really, really cool when you're like, hey, it's really neat that I can cook for myself. What can I create? And just get a little bit curious, because cooking itself can be seen as something that's really mundane and chore and like, oh damn. But there's also a lot of gratitude that we can have around being able to cook and shop at awesome places like Choices and have wild foods available to us. So you can keep that in mind next time you're in the kitchen too. Again, not always easy to do. Life happens, of course, but something to keep in mind. So going back to those spruce tips, lots and lots of vitamins A and C, which we've covered. Same with potassium and magnesium. We've already talked about the electrolyte benefits of those. Magnesium, again, is a really common mineral that you might be deficient in that might manifest in muscle cramping. If you have high anxiety, I always just check to see if people are taking magnesium supplements as well as the B12 in the most absorbable form. We see chlorophyll again in spruce tips, and I mentioned there detoxification benefits before. Chlorophyll, it also helps to control cravings and balance blood sugar. And if you've ever had any sort of candida problem or kind of fungal yeast problem, spruce tips are antimicrobial and antibacterial, and you can kind of smell that as well as the flavor, which is great. So it can be really good to consume while you're having any sort of candida protocol or cleanse. You can make spruce tip tea for that. And it's also used for coughs and sore throats. So if you can let some spruce tips even sit in honey, and it can be a natural cough drop for you like that. Pretty simple with these. You want to eat them about 2 weeks in after they've been in your fridge, after you've purchased them, or even longer. They are pretty stable. You can eat them raw. They're safe to eat raw. Of course, wash them beforehand. If you do cook them, it could alter the flavor quite just a little bit, as well as make it look a bit darker. And it's great for just having on hand to have as a last minute garnish. Niall was talking about the white spruce and how the Koikan of Alaska used every part of the tree. So part of it was used for medicine, some for shelter, firewood, food, waterproofing, and even ceremonial purposes. And same with different native populations of North America, using the flowers for food, making sap, syrup with the sap, and even using the wood for musical instruments as well. So trees are one of the most abundant gifts that we have in our ecosystem. It says best cooked. I don't know why I put that. I think I meant to put raw, so my apologies for that. They do have a nice lemon flavor though, so you can pop them into different sauces, even stuffings. There is recipes online, and I really want to try. I think Niall was saying this too, but trying to make spruce tip ice cream. I think that would really, really be delicious. Yeah. So, or sorbet, anything kind of lemony base that you want to experiment with sweetness, you can use spruce tips for that. I even saw a recipe for spruce tip shortbread, which I thought was really cool. When you use spruce tips in combination with grains, you're actually increasing the available mineral absorption. So you could take some West Coast Wild Foods rice and make a lemony risotto with spruce tips with some Parmesan cheese. When it's fresh, you can replace spruce tips with, you can replace rosemary with spruce tips, but if you want to dehydrate and grind it up, then you'll almost have like a nutmeg type of flavor. Dehydrate it for teas, and we experimented with a spruce tip gin, and it was delicious. So another way to kind of get crafty in your kitchen there. This is a neat little recipe, something that you can kind of try to make some nature candy. So a couple cups of maple syrup or birch syrup, and either 2 cups fresh or frozen. If they're frozen, you want them to be thawed. And it's just a way to combine them together in a pot, bring it to a boil, reduce it for 5 minutes, strain, remove the excess liquid. You can save it if you like. Spread it on a parchment paper lined baking sheet, dehydrate on whenever you're dehydrating something, the lower temperature, the more you're going to retain the nutrients. It's just going to take a bit longer, and then you can store them in the fridge. So to kind of end off my little portion here, there's a lot of wild meal ideas. So we only talked about 4 wild foods, and just the possibilities that came out of just those 4 foods is really incredible. And West Coast Wild Foods has some produce boxes where they're combining different things like wild seafood now and wild rice. So you could plate an entire meal made with wild foods. One of the things that we liked to try to do is make wild rice crackers with some using those greens for dips. And you can play with different flavor palettes. So you could use the wild rice in conjunction with seaweed and pine mushrooms and have a different flavor palette there. Those maple blossom fritters, boil up some huckleberries with some syrup and drizzle that on top. Serve some smoked salmon with the candied spruce tips, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can be creative. And when you've got wild foods available and you can buy local produce that Choices provides too, it's such a cool win-win situation. And yeah, that's that.
Wow, thank you. Thank you both. That was so much information. I'm hungry. I don't know about you guys, but I really am. Maybe if we just want to give it a couple minutes to see if any more questions come in. Are you guys open to that?
Absolutely, yeah.
In the meantime, I will maybe ask a question just while we wait. When someone's foraging, I've never foraged before, but I would go out and I look. Is there certain places where we shouldn't be gathering
Yes,
plants from?
that's actually a great question. So when you're foraging in general, the best rule of thumb to follow is in the backcountry, crown land is the area that you are actually allowed to forage from. When you're out there, say you're picking fiddleheads or stinging nettle, when you're on crown land, they're known as non-timber forest products, and they are free to pick for your own consumption. You can pick some stinging nettle and take it home, or dry it and keep it for the year. Areas that you are not allowed to harvest wild foods from, and we always, whenever we're talking to people about, coming with us, or if we're giving people tips about going out to try and find some themselves, we always tell them there are 3 areas where foraging is just not permitted, and that would be private land, First Nations reserves, and parkland. So and that's something that a lot of people who don't really know too much about foraging make the mistake of doing. Here in Vancouver and elsewhere in the province, people will accidentally head to the provincial park, where there is large areas of wilderness, but the provincial park is actually, you are not allowed to take any of the anything that grows in the park away from the park. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. The good news is in BC, we're fortunate to have a ton of backcountry and areas of wilderness away from the urban centres that are crown land, and there is so much space out there if you head out and actually make a trip of it. And there's so many different places you can go, and there's huge differences between foraging on the coast compared to foraging in the interior. There's different forest types, different foods will grow at certain times, and it's pretty neat.
Thank you. So it looks like we did have something come in. Someone requested if they could see another one of the slides on nettle. Maybe if we just look here. I think it was for a recipe.
Is it a smoothie one or the pesto one? I could do both.
Let's see here. I think it wasn't a smoothie, because she said the slides that it started with bring a pot to boil. So there must have been a slide maybe before that in a recipe.
Okay. Let's see. If it was bring a pot to boil, that could have been the fiddlehead ones, because I think fiddleheads were the only ones that I talked about boiling.
It could potentially be the blanching of the nettles.
Could be the blanching, actually. Yep. Oh, yeah. So blanch in salted boiling water. So that's to get rid of the sting. Boiling or steaming for 2 minutes. And then if you want, you can drain it in ice water, and that's just to prepare it for the freezer bag so that you're not putting boiling hot nettles straight into plastic. When you're boiling nettles, just to have on hand, you don't have to drain it in ice water. That's not an essential step of the process. That's just more for being able to handle the nettle. and the temperature. So I'm not sure if that was kind of one of the pieces of information, but this was the recipe, which isn't, again, really so much of a measurable, you know, a quarter cup of this, a half a cup of this, because it's really something that's I wanted to put up as, you know, you get kind of free reign with how you want to create it. Just make sure you've got enough olive oil to cover whatever you've put in, and then taste it, adjust it to go.
Thank you. So she said it was called preparation, starting with boil a medium-sized pot.
Okay. Maybe it was the Fiddlehead. Let's see. Well, this is my one slide that yeah. This is for the Fiddlehead flatbread. So this is the ingredient list if you wanted to have another look there, and I'll give you a minute to write it down if you want, and I'll also show you the link for the website where I've got the recipe from. You can use whatever mushrooms you like, but morel mushrooms really, really have a delicious taste. So you can use a cup of whatever sliced mushrooms you like. Any wild mushroom will bring a different flavor to it. And morel mushroom season's right around the corner, so that's exciting. And if you've got a chance to get all that down, I'll show you the next slide. And if you need me to go back, no problem. So this is the preparation. So bringing that pot of salted water to boil for 15 minutes. While that's boiling, you can start the sauteing process. So while it's boiling, you can heat up 2 tablespoons of butter, and you're going to saute your green onions and garlic until you start to get that really wonderful smell. Then you can add the mushrooms, and you cook it till the mushrooms starting to kind of wilt a little bit to get softened. Add those cooked fiddleheads, stir it around, season with salt and pepper for a couple minutes. Then place all of that mixture onto whatever flatbread you're using, spread it out, then sprinkle on your goat cheese and basil, and bake that in the oven. Depending on how finicky your oven is, you might need to bake it longer or less. My oven seems to have to take extra time. And one of the key indicators is that, oh, it's just smelling so good, you want to go and eat it. That's a good way to say, yeah, it's done. And then there's the link. It's adapted from www.landofgnomes.com/nom/morel-mushroom-and-fiddlehead-burn-lapland. So again, I changed a couple things, especially the washing and boiling of the fiddleheads. Was that enough time for both slides there?
Thank you for doing that. That's wonderful. If you need more information on the recipe, maybe you could just email me. My email is abbotsfordnutrition@choicesmarkets.com, and I can follow up with you after as well. I'm not sure if any more questions came in. I don't think any more questions are coming in. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I had a little bit of a technical issue there. So I think I'm going to close it up, unless you guys have anything else to add.
No, I think that's, yeah, I think that's it from my side anyway, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sure everyone learned a lot. I learned a lot, and I'm excited to try some recipes, so that is wonderful. And thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for your questions. If you want to find out about future Choices Markets events, you can go to our website, choicesmarkets.com, and you can also follow us on YouTube as well and our other social media. Be sure to wait for the email that will come after with the link for the survey if you'd like your nutrition back. And if you want to reach out to the nutrition team, come into a store and say hi or give us a call at one of our stores or look to our website and you can be forwarded to connect with one of us as well. So thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, everyone. That was such a fun opportunity. Thank you so much, Choices. That was awesome.
Sorry, I'm just having a little problem with my Zoom here. But thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.